Mesh, but the internal damage was worse. A rupture, maybe. He could feel warmth spreading into his ribs. But his job wasn't over. The diplomat remained still. Wasn't protection, Dax said. He scanned the skyline. That shot had come from above, fourth floor. Broken window. He'd barely shoved her aside in time. There'd been a second shot aimed for her temple. It hit him in the back instead. Where's your evac? They hit us hard, too hard. Silence, then, reluctantly, she stepped toward him. Her boots made no sound on the scorched concrete. He could see her now, fully illuminated under a flickering security light. Her skin was a lavender so pale it shimmered white. Thin tendrils of hair coiled like silver wires around her face, and her mouth, barely parted, gave away the barest trace of unease. The alley was burning. Smoke curled into the air like the city itself was exhaling its last breath. Sirens wailed overhead, but the human didn't flinch. He was already bleeding. Dax Crow pressed his shoulder against the wall, left hand clamped around the pistol grip holstered beneath his coat. The fabric was soaked with his own blood, slick and sticky. But the pain hadn't sunk in yet. Not with her so close. Just a dozen meters ahead. Framed by the steam rising from a cracked vent, the alien diplomat moved with impossible grace, untouched by the chaos. Her silhouette shimmered in the filtered moonlight, tall and robed in the insignia of the Zelari Empire. Even with half her security detail dead and the others scattering, she didn't run. She stood there like her presence alone could repel danger. Dax shouted, voice hoarse. She looked at him. Not through him, not over him. At him, her eyes gleamed silver, Zelari optics, able to see more spectrums than any human scope. But they narrowed like she didn't need any enhancements to judge him. A primitive grunt with a badge. I do not take orders from Terrence, she said, voice clipped. Well, that's funny, Dax grunted. I ordered the evac team to withdraw. Dax stared at her. For what? I will not risk more lives. This is a political ambush, if I vanish from the map. You'll vanish all right, he muttered. She tilted her head. When they're suicidal. Footsteps echoed down the far end of the alley. Muffled, coordinated, not looters or locals. Tactical, closing in. Dax reached for his comms. Command. This is Bodyguard 6, code red. Diplomat compromised, extraction denied. We're boxed in near Sector 9. The line hissed back static. The diplomat gestured toward the receiver. Signal dampeners. The moment they opened fire. A terrific. Dax hauled himself to his feet. All right. Change of plan, we move. He reached for her arm, to pull her into the shadows. Her hand lashed out, fingers splayed. A flicker of golden light flared between them. An energy barrier, personal shield, set to proximity mode. He recoiled instinctively, nearly stumbling into a broken crate. I don't need your guidance. You're going to get yourself killed. Or worse, captured. And if that happens... The shield flickered, faltered. She stared at him for a long second. Then, without a word, she deactivated it. I will follow. Dax didn't wait for a thank you. He limped toward the far end of the alley, ducking under piping and smoke vents, motioning for her to stay low. Whatever beef she had with human protocol, she didn't argue now. She moved like a shadow behind him. They reached the maintenance door of an old Skytram station. Locked, Dax kicked it twice, then shot the handle. It groaned open, and they slipped inside, swallowed by darkness and the scent of rust. The tram station had long been abandoned, repurposed into storage for decommissioned tech. Dax guided her through crates and collapsed scaffolds, every movement sending a spike of agony down his spine. You were prepared for this. He glanced back. For what? He knew they would attack. I knew someone would try. And yet, I was assigned to you. She stared at him again. like she was trying to peel away the layers of something that didn't make sense. Then, without warning, she moved closer. Her hands hovered just inches from his chest. He grunted. Not the time. If your blood loss accelerates. She didn't wait for permission. From beneath her robe, she retrieved a Solari medstitcher compact humming faintly with bioelectric charge. She reached under his jacket, careful not to jostle the torn flesh. Dax didn't flinch. But her touch wasn't what he expected. It wasn't clinical or indifferent. It was deliberate, gentle. "You're surprisingly calm for someone surrounded by corpses and smoke," he muttered. "I've been surrounded by worse." He glanced at her, reading the lines on her face. No fear. No sweat. Not even hatred. "Just focus. What a name?" he asked. Yeah, that's the title." Her lips pressed into a line. He nodded at Dax. The stitcher beeped. She pulled back slowly, studying her work, then met his eyes. For the first time, there was something like respect in her gaze. "I underestimated you." He smirked, blood still drying on his side. "Don't worry." A low mechanical growl echoed from outside. A drone, heavy with searchlights, scanning the buildings. Dax motioned toward the tram pit. Underground. No shield this time. No resistance. Together, they descended into the dark. Behind them, the drone light swept past the broken station doors, and missed them by inches. The tunnel groaned around them like the world was about to collapse. It smelled of oxidized metal and stagnant water, the kind that clung to your skin like guilt. Dax's boots echoed against the grated walkway, and behind him, Kale moved with the silence of a ghost. No words passed between them. Just the hum of distant power lines and the dull ache in his ribs growing worse with every step. Dax stole a glance over his shoulder. She walked with the same unnerving calm, her robes now stained with grime and soot. Her silver hair, once neatly coiled, had unraveled slightly, framing her face in disheveled strands. She didn't seem to care. Dax asked, half to break the silence. Kale didn't answer immediately. Only insinuations. She said nothing, but the faint curl of her lip betrayed her agreement. Maybe even amusement. They reached a service junction where the tram rails diverged into two dark tunnels. Dax stopped, listening. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped. A faint tremor ran through the floor. He pulled a small motion scanner from his coat, tapped it against his knee to reboot the screen. Signals weak. Could be a heat bloom east of here. Maybe a drone on patrol will head south. Kale stepped forward. Dax turned slowly. Her chin rose slightly, a mark of defiance. "You are injured. Your presence slows us both. I should proceed alone." "That's not how this works." Then why am I bleeding?" She faltered, just for a second. But he saw it. The hesitation. "I acted in practicality." "Right?" His voice echoed down the tunnel, swallowed by the dark. For a moment, neither moved. Then Kale's voice came, quiet and sharp. Dax blinked. She was looking at him now, not like a superior watching a soldier, but like a person looking at another human being. Her eyes burned with something heavier than irritation. Frustration. Maybe shame. "I'm a ranking envoy of the Triune. My presence on Terra is a political act. Every step, every word, must serve the treaty. This mission was not supposed to involve blood, not yours." Dax leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly. "Yeah, well..." He slid down until he was sitting, wincing as his side flared. The pain was sharp now, more demanding. He touched the medpatch Kale had applied. Still sealed, but temporary. She stood above him, unreadable. "You're scared we'll drag your shiny empire down with us. That our instability's contagious, so you keep us at arm's length. You make treaties and shake hands and smile for cameras." Kale's voice softened, almost imperceptibly. Dax laughed, short and bitter. No, I think you're right, we are dangerous. He pushed himself up with a groan, one hand on the wall. Kale stood too, gaze steady. She studied him, like she was trying to reconcile the man before her with the species she feared. You said you'd served others. Because you were the one no one wanted. Her brows rose slightly. I've served 3 alien dignitaries in 2 years, he said. All of them ignored protocol, went off schedule, and thought they were too good for ground level security. She lowered herself to a crouch, graceful even in the confined space. It always is. You don't trust me. He expected denial. Maybe another cold dismissal. But she surprised him. I don't trust humans. He looked up. She wasn't being cruel. Just honest. I read your history. Kale continued. Your civil wars, your resource conflicts, the way you devour your own cities with death and dust. The Triune offered your people a ladder out of that chaos. That's not distrust. That's fear. But she didn't interrupt. I know. That drew an actual smile. Barely there, but real. Dax saw the way it touched her eyes before she smothered it. A rumble echoed down the northern tunnel, closer now. Lights flashing red. Dax cursed, we've got movement. Kale turned, scanning the tunnel entrance with eerie precision. Automated crawler, at least 3 drone escorts. No more debating. Then. Could we move? He took the lead again. Kale followed without argument now. Their breaths synchronized in the rhythm of retreat. The southern tunnel narrowed, forcing them into single file. They passed through rusted maintenance hatches and over a derailed tram rail. A collapsed junction. Kale reached out without warning, catching Dax's elbow as he stumbled. Careful. He paused, her hand lingered a moment too long. Then it was gone. They reached a grating and forced it open. Beyond lay a vertical shaft, 100 meters of ladder leading toward flickering light. Dax stared up. You first. Painfully. But yeah, she began climbing, her movements fast. Dax waited a beat before gripping the rungs with trembling hands. Blood dripped from his side as he pulled himself up inch by inch. 10 meters below, the crawler's searchlight cut into the tunnel mouth. Kale! Faster. Dax gritted his teeth and kept climbing. He didn't stop. Not until her hand appeared over the lip, reaching for him. He took it. The hatch slammed shut above them with a metallic clang that echoed down the maintenance shaft. Dax leaned against the wall, gasping. One arm clutched to his side as he tried to catch his breath. Blood soaked the side of his shirt. Darker now, crusted from the climb and movement. Every breath burned. Kale knelt beside him without a word. The glow of emergency lights painted her face in deep red and shadow. She reached into her satchel and retrieved another med patch, pressing it firmly against the edge of his wound. Dax hissed. This won't hold forever, she said. A good thing we're not running marathons. They were in a storage compartment wedged between floors, likely once used for automated repair bots. Long since decommissioned. The air was thick with disuse, hot and stagnant. Panels flickered on walls where once diagnostic screens glowed. Now, only dull warning symbols blinked system fault. Interface offline, Kale stood and began surveying the space. It wasn't large, 10 feet by 10, maybe less, with a single exit and manual iris hatch sealed shut on the far wall. Dax tilted his head back. So, Kale glanced over her shoulder. Temporarily. She didn't respond to the joke. Instead, she stepped to the hatch and tapped the control panel. No response. She pried the faceplate off and began inspecting the wiring beneath. Dax watched her, her fingers deft and efficient. All envoys are given basic mechanical cross-training. She didn't look up. That silenced him for a beat. The soft click of wires echoed in the stillness. So you really believe that? I failed to anticipate the strike. I led us into danger. I jeopardized the Triune's diplomatic presence on Earth. Funny, Dax said. From where I'm sitting, I see a diplomat patching a wound, hot-wiring a door, and dragging a bodyguard's ass out of danger. She turned to face him fully, face unreadable. You also saved her life? That hung in the air like smoke. Neither moved. The silence stretched taut between them. Dax finally broke it. You always talk like that. Cale straightened. Better than false warmth. Dax raised an eyebrow. And yet here you are, stuck in a box with me. About what? Humans' emotions, imperfection. Cale didn't answer. She turned back to the panel, but slower this time. Less mechanical, more thoughtful. The edge had dulled. Dax shifted, grimacing. You always follow the rules. Yes. Her hands stilled. I know. But I understand people. And when someone's ready to crack, they usually talk about stakes and obligations a lot. She stepped back from the panel. The hatches fused. Glad to change the subject, he said. The pain in his side flared white-hot. But he pushed through. He crossed to the hatch beside her. Coordinated pressure. You push from the left. Together they braced. Metal groaned beneath their weight. Dax gritted his teeth, using every ounce of strength he had. His muscles trembled. Cale pressed her shoulder into the seam, jaw clenched tight. The hatch popped open an inch. Then two, with a shriek of stressed alloy, it gave way, swimming inward. A gust of cooler air hit them. Dax stumbled, catching himself on the wall. Cale didn't smile, but her expression relaxed. We'll need to stay low. He nodded. Great, smells like wet socks and old algae. The corridor beyond was pitch black save for a flickering light panel in the distance. Pipes crisscrossed the ceiling. The floor sloped downward, slick with condensation. They moved side by side now, her steps steady, his uneven. They said little. But the silence had changed. No longer strained. Just tired, they passed through dripping pipes, around rusted tanks, and into a larger maintenance chamber where old drones lay abandoned like corpses. Dax slumped onto a crate, breathing hard. Cale stood nearby, scanning for any sign of threat. Her hand hovered near the blade strapped across her lower back, not standard envoy gear. He noticed, that's not regulation. She didn't look at him. He raised a brow. I was warned, she said, that humans might be unpredictable, that being stationed here was volatile. He let that sit a moment. So the blade was fear, but patching me up. No. The lines of tension in her shoulders, the weight behind her careful stance. You ever let anyone in before? She glanced at him, eyes sharp. I bead a lot. Her expression faltered just slightly, lips tightening. A flicker in her eyes. She looked away. He didn't press. Just let the quiet settle. Then, finally she sat beside him. Close enough to share body heat. Close enough that, if someone looked in from the outside, they wouldn't see an alien diplomat and her human guard. Just two people. Caught in something neither had planned for. And for the first time since the attack, neither of them tried to pretend they weren't afraid. The quiet didn't last. A low vibration trembled through the walls, subtle at first, like the humming of a dormant engine stirring awake. Dax's eyes flicked up from where he sat slouched against the crate, and Cale was already standing, head tilted, her long fingers lightly pressed to a pipe. She didn't speak, didn't need to. He could feel it now too. The dull rhythm was growing stronger, closer. Mechanical company, Dax asked, rising with effort. Cale nodded once. It could be a patrol crawler. We're underground, offer it. She moved toward the chamber's far end, checking the shadows where the old conduits met the curved wall. Not us. Dax blinked, come again. Kale's voice was calm, but her shoulders were tense. Triune envoys were encoded biosignatures. She met his eyes. Dax exhaled. And no one thought to mention that before we got buried alive. It should have been disabled the moment the attack began. I attempted to sever it. She paused. They were faster. Dax swore under his breath. Kale nodded. Yes. Perfect. He rubbed his face. We need distance. There was a relay post south of this district. Decommissioned during the blackout. How far? 2 kilometers? Dax groaned. Of course it is. Kale had already moved to a side hatch, pushing it open with effort. The tunnel beyond was narrower and colder, thick with the smell of rust and old water. Slippery steps descended into darkness. He followed her, teeth gritted, his side pulsing with heat and pain. The faint trickle of water echoed around them, a low whisper that never stopped. The passage sloped sharply downward, and soon the air became damp and heavy. Their boots splashed through shallow water. Kale's pace was relentless. Dax stumbled once, cursing under his breath. She didn't slow. He called. I'm still bleeding. She turned, and this time her expression cracked. It wasn't disdain. It was fear barely disguised as resolve. The kind of look someone wears when they're balancing on the edge of something too big to say. We don't have time to slow down. We're both dead, he finished. I know. Not yet, she looked at him. Really looked. Like she was seeing not just the blood, or the limp, or the gritted jaw, but the fact that he was still there. Still following. I didn't expect you to last this long, she said. He offered a crooked smile. She turned and moved forward again. This time, her pace was just slightly slower. They traveled in silence until they reached a rusted-out section, where the tunnel ceiling had partially collapsed. Sharp beams of broken metal jutted out like jagged teeth. Kale ducked under easily. Dax followed, and hissed as the sharp edge tore through his sleeve, slicing the skin underneath. Kale turned at the sound, just in time to see him stagger and lean against the wall. Blood again. Without hesitation, she moved to him, her hands already reaching for the emergency salve at her belt. He waved her off, breath shaky. It's fine. You're weakening. You think I don't know that, he snapped, then immediately wins, not from the pain. Kale didn't flinch. Instead, she reached forward and gently peeled the torn fabric back. Her fingers brushed his skin, and for a heartbeat, he went very still. She worked silently, applying the gel with care, then wrapping a strip of cloth around the cut. When she was done, she didn't pull away right away. Her hand lingered. You should have left me in that tram tunnel. I considered it. He smiled faintly. She met his gaze. No. Low, mechanical, like engines spinning to life. Kale looked up sharply. They've dropped in another crawler. Dax pushed off the wall. The next stretch of tunnel narrowed further. They had to move in single file again. The air turned colder. Water pooled deeper at their feet. Ahead, the faint shimmer of light glowed green. Emergency strips along the walls still powered somehow. The relay post. It loomed up out of the dark, flooded and decaying. The old Triune tech blinked faintly behind a cracked polyglass panel, half submerged in algae-coated water. Kale moved to it immediately, hands working to override the ancient locks. Dax kept watch, his eyes flicking to every shadow. Hurry. I don't like this. Kale didn't reply. Her fingers danced over the manual override, accessing deeper protocols. Lights blinked erratically. Then, click. Done, she said. Dax turned signals off. She nodded. I've killed the beacon, we're dark. And it was the moment the wall exploded. Concrete and dust burst inward. Dax was thrown off his feet, slamming into a bulkhead. Ears ringing, he saw the shimmer of energy as a spider-like combat drone unfolded itself from the debris. 8 limbs, 4 barrels. gleaming red optics that locked on instantly. They didn't speak for a long time after the drone fell. Kale stood over its twitching chassis, watching the red optics fade to black. Its last spasm flicked one clawed leg toward her boot before finally falling limp. Smoke coiled upward in wisps, barely visible in the thin light filtering from the broken relay. Dax pushed himself to a sitting position against the wall, breathing like he'd run a marathon. His wound screamed at every breath, but he was more focused on Kale. Her face was a mask, not of calm but of restraint, like something inside her was about to snap. "Kale," he asked. She didn't turn. You said it was decommissioned." The words landed like a confession. Dax stood, slowly, carefully, and approached her. The room buzzed softly with dying energy and the faint static of ruined tech. Her blade hung loose in one hand, the other clenched tight at her side. "You all right?" "I made assumptions. And they cost us time. Blood." Hey, he stepped closer, not touching her. "We're still alive. I can't afford miscalculations, not when everything. She turned to him, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark, that faint alien shimmer catching on unshed fury. "They sent me here to preserve relations, to maintain protocol, to be calm and measured." Kale was already moving. She dove, drawing her blade, slashing at the drone's legs to throw it off balance. It shrieked, an awful grinding sound, and fired. Dax lunged from the side, throwing himself into its flank. The weapon's blast scorched the wall behind where Kale had just been. Together, they managed to unbalance it. She stabbed deep into its thorax joint, then yanked the blade free. Sparks erupted, the drone shuddered and collapsed. Silence returned. Dax collapsed onto his back, chest heaving. So much. Kale stood over the wreckage, blade trembling in her hand. Dax blinked. "Then how?" It was guarding the relay. Dax looked up at her. She was breathing hard now, her robes torn, her face smeared with grime. He'd never seen her look more like a soldier. Or more human. They stared at each other, the hum of the broken relay post still flickering behind them. They weren't just hunted now. They were at war. Dax looked at her for a long moment. "Yeah, well..." That made her pause. She looked at him differently now, like she wasn't sure whether to be insulted or intrigued. A soft beat passed between them. Then her eyes dropped to his wound. "You're deteriorating, thanks." She moved to him, fingers already reaching to check the patch. It was wet with fresh blood. Dax flinched but let her work. "You need a proper medical facility." He gave a dry laugh. Kale didn't answer. Instead, she pulled out the last of her field salve. Her fingers were gentler this time. She didn't rush. Dax watched her, frowning. "You didn't just come here to kill the signal. You were hoping something else would be here." She hesitated, just for a breath, then said, "I thought my contact might have survived the ambush. He was posted to the relay post after the peace accords began to break down, a last contingency." And she straightened. "I'm sorry." She crouched and retrieved a small, scorched data puck from what was left of the relay interface. Her fingers lingered on it. "What's that?" She turned it over in her hand. "Encrypted logs, from the post, if he died here." Dax watched her, his voice low. She looked up, and something in her eyes cracked, just slightly. "He was the one who taught me to trust that diplomacy wasn't weakness." Dax nodded slowly. Kale stood fully, her jaw tightening. "And if his death is in that puck..." The conviction in her voice made Dax's stomach twist. It wasn't cold fury. It was something deeper, personal. He stepped toward her. "Kale, I need to ask you something. You don't have to answer." She looked at him, silent. "That attack back in the corridor, it wasn't just about taking you out, was it? It wasn't random. They knew your path." Her expression didn't change, but the way her eyes avoided his for just a moment confirmed everything. Dax's voice dropped. Her silence was answer enough. She stepped closer, then slowly reached out, and rested a hand on his arm. It was a small gesture. No formality. No performance. Just connection. It made Dax feel more unsteady than the blood loss. Let's go, she said. He nodded to lead the way. They stepped into the darkness together. No longer allies by necessity, but something more dangerous. Two people with nothing left to lose. The sky above the burned district was ash-grey, low with smoke and the scent of scorched metal. Dax followed Cale through a broken breach in the outer wall, careful not to drag his feet. His injury slowed him, but he didn't complain. Not now. Something between them had shifted, silent but certain. A thread pulled tight through blood, fire, and trust not easily earned. The city was a carcass. Towers stood like bones, hollowed by war. Electrical conduits sparked in the distance. Automated defenses lay abandoned and half dismantled, gutted by scavengers or sabotage. Somewhere far off, a siren wail once then died. Cale moved like she belonged here. Not afraid, just precise. She paused beside a shattered pillar and looked back at Dax. He smirked, even as he leaned on the wall to catch his breath. I'd been better. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing. Still silent, Dax felt his heart rate spike. Cale, if someone inside your own mission sold you out, if this whole thing was meant to fail, then we're not just running. I know. You knew, but I suspected from the beginning. She looked at the puck again, then slipped it into her satchel. Dax pressed a hand to his side, eyes narrowing. We get to the surface, find the old comms tower in the burned district, if the encryption core there is intact. But who? Dax paused. And what happens to me? Cale turned toward him. For the first time, her gaze didn't carry calculation or formality. Just quiet certainty. You saved my life. More than once. And when this is over, Cale turned and continued forward, guiding him around wreckage and down a fractured transit tunnel. The street beyond opened onto what had once been a communications hub, now a skeleton of support beams and twisted alloy. They stepped inside carefully. Wind whispered through broken slats high overhead, and a flock of grey-winged scavenger birds scattered at their arrival. Near the far wall stood the remains of the encryption core, a tall monolith scorched at its base, but still intact. Cale knelt by the control panel and slid the puck into an interface port. Lights flickered, the core hummed. Dax stayed nearby, watching her. Cale didn't look up. If he had time, yes, if not. Dax lowered himself beside a pile of scorched crates. The ache in his side was constant now, dull but insistent. He watched Cale's hands move with precision, fingers dancing across the ancient input pad. You're different now. Cale paused, a single glance over her shoulder. Explain, when I first saw you, you were a mask. Every word, every gesture calculated. He met her eyes. She stared at him, unreadable, then turned back to the console. Sure you did. You could have let me die in the tunnel. Her fingers slowed. He smiled faintly. Thanks. Cale straightened as the encryption core lit fully, a column of light rising into the air. Within it, a flickering image stabilized, an alien male with a long, angular face and a weathered diplomat's robe. Dax shifted upright. Is that? Bane. The message played. Static blurred some of it, but the meaning was clear. Try and command compromised. Do not trust High Consul Vyeth. This mission was never meant to succeed. It was meant to fracture peace talks beyond repair. My location discovered. Extraction failed. I leave this message for Cale. If you survive this, go dark, burn the protocols. The projection shimmered, then dissolved. Silence fell in the tower's ruins. Dax swallowed. Well, that confirms a few things. Cale stood motionless, her shoulders rising and falling slowly. When she turned to him, her face was not just pale, it was cold with a new, measured fury. He knew. Partners, survivors, co-conspirators in war that had begun long before either of them knew it. And maybe, just maybe, something more. The hideout was nestled deep in the forest's edge, an old diplomatic forward station that Cale had quietly repurposed long before the mission began. Shielded by geological interference and blacklisted from official maps. It was the one place she knew would give them a sliver of silence in the chaos. Dax leaned back against the wall of the compact shelter, watching a tiny light flicker on the console. His wound was healing, slowly, thanks to a mix of alien bioserum and old-fashioned human grit. He still moved with a limp. But the fever had broken, and the fog in his mind was lifting. Cale moved through the room in controlled silence. She barely looked at him, which, after the closeness they'd shared, felt jarring. Cold, like she'd flipped a switch and gone back to the version of herself from day one, distant, clinical, unreadable. Today you're shutting down again. She froze by the weapons locker, her back to him. He waited. I'm recalibrating, she said finally, pulling out a compact energy rifle and inspecting the barrel. Cale turned slowly. What we're about to do, once we act on Veyron's message, will mark us both as traitors, not just to my people, to yours, because I'll be exposing something they don't want exposed. I never signed up for this. I just wanted to keep some uptight alien diplomat alive. She didn't deny it. Instead, she stepped back from the console and looked to the ruined skyline. Dax tilted his head. Cale looked at him fully. No, I plan to act. No more neutrality. And me. Cale walked to him slowly. She crouched in front of him, her gaze level with his. You've seen the worst of me, the real me. And you stayed. I stayed because I trusted you. She reached out and touched his chest, lightly, just over the wound that had stopped bleeding but still throbbed. Her hand dropped. Her eyes flicked to his lips for the briefest of seconds. Not longing, not lust. Just the acknowledgement of something fragile neither had the strength to name yet. I have a place we can hide. Remote, off-grid, enough supplies to last weeks. You need time to heal. He nodded. Time with you. Cale stood good because after this, there's no going back. Together they gathered what they could. Cale uploaded Veyron's message to a secure channel and scrubbed every trace of their presence from the core. As the sun began to sink beyond the shattered towers, they moved, not as soldier and protector, not as captor and hostage, but as something new. And I stayed? Her gaze softened barely. She looked down, then said, I'm afraid. That surprised him. It was the first time she'd admitted fear, not through implication or indirect phrasing, but outright. He stood slowly and stepped toward her. I know. Afraid they won't. Dax reached for her hand. She let him. He won't. Before Cale could respond, a low-pitched chime echoed through the shelter, one of the perimeter sensors. She snapped to alertness, wrenching her hand away and bolting to the console. Dax grabbed his sidearm, heart thudding. One contact. Light signature. She looked at him, eyes cold again. Stay inside. No Wayne. Cale, I didn't stay behind just to be a liability. She hesitated, then nodded. They slipped out of the shelter's side hatch, weapons drawn. The trees were dense, shadows long and crawling as dusk settled in. A faint rustle came from the underbrush. Cale raised her rifle, stepping carefully. Then a voice, mechanically amplified, echoed from the trees. Cale Tivarin. Dax froze. They know your name. Cale didn't lower her weapon. They come out, as she called. A figure emerged, tall and wrapped in camo-eve armor. It wasn't one of hers. It wasn't one of his. The insignia was blank, deliberately so. The neutral operatives. Mercs. Not just mercs, Dax said. They're from the Interfactional Discretionary Council. The figure raised a palm. You have data belonging to sovereign authorities. Turn it over. Kale stepped forward. That message was left by a diplomat executed under false charges. The merc didn't flinch. Not our concern. Dax raised his pistol. A second voice got in from the side. They both turned. A new figure stepped into view, sleek, familiar armor. Kale's eyes widened. Saren. Her features were alien like Kale's, but her face bore a cruel edge, polished and cold. Kale's voice was raw. Saren raised her weapon. You made things very difficult. Surrender now. Dax stepped in front of Kale. If you want her... Saren raised a brow. Human loyalty touching. The firefight erupted instantly. Kale dove behind a tree, returning fire in tight bursts. Dax dropped low, using the terrain, putting his training to work. The mercs fanned out, but Kale moved like a ghost, every motion efficient, lethal. Dax took down one with a clean headshot, but the recoil jolted his ribs and knocked him back behind cover. Pain shot through his torso. Kale was surrounded, pinned between Saren and a second operative. Dax saw it happen before she did, Saren flanking her, silent, rifle raised. Kale! She spun, too late. The shot fired. Dax threw himself forward, crashing into Kale just in time. The bolt meant for her carved across his back instead. He landed hard, breath knocked out of him. Kale screamed, not from pain, but from something far worse. Rage. She rose with a fury Dax had never seen and tore into the mercenaries. 3 shots, 3 kills. She moved like a shadow given form, until it was just her and Saren. The fire crackled softly, casting long shadows on the shelter's curved walls. Outside, the forest whispered with wind and distant night calls, but inside, time felt paused. Dax lay unconscious, breath shallow, chest bandaged and bloodied. The burn across his back had seared deep, and the improvised medjol Kale used was barely holding the infection at bay. Kale sat beside him, unmoving. Her rifle was across her lap. Her eyes, unblinking, stared into the fire but saw something far older. Memories. Saren's voice still echoed in her skull. You shouldn't have fallen for a human. The shame, the accusation. The truth, she hadn't wanted this. Not from the beginning. Dax was supposed to be a shield, expendable if necessary. A body to throw between her and political assassination. Yet somewhere between the wreckage, the firefights, and the silences they shared, he had stopped being disposable. He had become hers. Not in possession. In consequence, Kale turned her head and looked at him now, the way his jaw clenched slightly even in sleep. The flicker of pain that twisted his brow. He had thrown himself in front of her. Not because of duty, but because of belief. She didn't deserve that. You shouldn't have come. Saren raised her weapon again. Kale didn't hesitate. Her blade flashed, clean and fast, and Saren dropped. Silence returned, broken only by Dax's ragged breathing. Kale dropped beside him. You idiot, she said. He smiled through the pain. She let out a choked sound. Not a sob. Something more primal. You're not allowed to die. I'll try to remember that, he muttered. Kale lifted him carefully, holding him against her. For the first time, her voice broke. His eyes closed, but he was still breathing. She stayed there, holding him, her pulse pounding in her ears, and she knew there would be no more running, only revenge and reckoning. The fire crackled softly, casting long shadows on the shelter's curved walls. Outside, the forest whispered with wind and distant night calls, but inside, time felt paused. Dax lay unconscious, breath shallow, chest bandaged and bloodied. The burn across his back had seared deep, and the improvised medjol Kale used was barely holding the infection at bay. Kale sat beside him, unmoving. Her rifle was across her lap. Her eyes, unblinking, stared into the fire but saw something far older. Memories. Saren's voice still echoed in her skull. You shouldn't have fallen for a human. The shame, the accusation. The truth, she hadn't wanted this. Not from the beginning. Dax was supposed to be a shield. Expendable if necessary. A body to throw between her and political assassination. Yet somewhere between the wreckage, the firefights, and the silences they shared, he had stopped being disposable. He had become hers. Not in possession. In consequence, Hale turned her head and looked at him now, the way his jaw clenched slightly even in sleep. The flicker of pain that twisted his brow. He had thrown himself in front of her. Not because of duty, but because of belief. She didn't deserve that. She reached out and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. Her hand lingered. You stubborn, reckless man. But Dax stirred faintly. She leaned closer. Fingers pressed to his wrist, checking the pulse. Still there, still strong. But time was running out. The medal wouldn't last forever. The internal damage was worse than she'd admitted out loud. He needed real help. A sterile environment. A proper biopod. But that meant surfacing. That meant facing the very world hunting them. Hale stood and paced the length of the shelter. She activated the console, fingers flying across input lines as she pulled up satellite sweeps, encrypted beacons, and filtered comm bands. No rescue was coming. Not for her. Not for him. But there was something else. A relay station on the northern ridge, abandoned during the last wave of conflict, but partially powered by thermal vents. If she could reach it, and get a signal out, she might be able to ping a private medical drone from her old covert network. Expensive, Elio, but fast. And clean. Hale turned, eyes back on Dax. You bought me time. She started preparing supplies. A light pack. A thermal charge to jumpstart the relay. A sidearm. She paused by the door, looking back at him. This was the moment. The pivot. The one she had always avoided. Before Dax, everything she did had been for mission, loyalty, and control. Every step calculated. Every loss acceptable. Even Veyrin's death, while tragic, had served a purpose. But now she understood what it meant to lose someone not as a statistic, but as a part of yourself. She stepped to the bedside one more time. Gently leaned down and kissed his forehead. I'll come back. And then she was gone. Cold wind whipped at her armor, slicing through the seams. The path was steep, slick with moss and cracked shale. Trees thinned the higher she climbed, and shadows grew longer. She moved with focus, every motion tight and silent. Her pulse steady, her breath controlled. At the summit, the relay station emerged from behind a curtain of stone, half buried, choked in vines, but intact. She slipped inside through a maintenance hatch and lit her wrist torch. Dust floated in the air like lazy specters. The command console lay covered in leaves and time, but the core power indicator still blinked faintly. Hale plugged in the thermal charge and began the boot-out sequence. The screen sputtered, glowed to life. Relay system standby, calibrating link. She input her old code, buried deep from her days before the envoy title, back when she still worked in shadows, removing threats rather than negotiating with them. The network responded. Weak, but active. She tapped into the black market drone system and transmitted a rescue request, keyed with urgent triage. Estimated arrival 38 minutes. Hale leaned back, breathing hard. Her legs ached. Her arm had begun to stiffen where Saren had grazed her. But the signal was sent. She had done it. And now came the hardest part, waiting. Back at the shelter. Sweat slicked his brow. He mumbled in his sleep. Fragments of memories escaping his lips. Names, places, or whispered, Hale. He dreamed of her. Of their first confrontation on the burning streets. Of her standing tall. Eyes gleaming, voice sharp. Then of the night she almost smiled as she handed him rations. At the time, her hand accidentally brushed his while they set traps. The silence they shared in the tunnels. The first moment she called him by name, not title. Kale, he murmured again. Don't go? Kale stood just outside the relay now, watching the dark horizon. 30 minutes had passed. Then, movement, a faint ripple in the sky, and a shadow descended fast. The drone, sleek, black, needle-shaped. It landed with a whisper. The rear hatch opened. A pod extended, small, shielded, preloaded for bioemergency containment. Kale ran diagnostics one final time. Everything worked. She gave the drone Dax's biometrics and sent the signal. Then she turned and sprinted back into the forest, feet barely touching the ground. Dawn was breaking when she reached the shelter again. Inside, Dax was colder, his pulse thready. She knelt and gathered him into her arms. I've got you. To hold on, the drone hovered outside. With slow, careful motions, she laid him in the pod and activated life support. As the chamber sealed, she pressed her palm to the glass. Dax's eyes fluttered open. Are you? She smiled, tears streaking down her face. Are you? For you? His eyes closed again. But this time, it wasn't unconsciousness. It was trust. The drone lifted off, rising toward the pink-streaked sky, vanishing into the clouds. Kale stood alone, wind tangling her hair, rifle slung across her back. Her old life was gone. Her purpose had changed. She wasn't just a bodyguard. Not anymore. She was a woman with blood on her hands, a target on her back, and something fragile worth protecting. And the reckoning she had promised. It was only just beginning. Kale moved through the diplomatic stations, lower decks, like a ghost. The air was heavy with tension, an electric charge that hadn't been there before. No patrols, no fall checkpoints. Just silence and red emergency lights pulsing in time with the station's failing systems. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The drone had made it. Dax was in critical care under an assumed identity in one of the medbays in the outer ring. But news of the breach had already reached the command core. An assassination plot traced back to Seren's Splinter faction had come to light, and Kale, now labeled Rogue, had become a phantom on her own diplomatic grounds. She rounded a corner, staying low behind crates of supply rations, her earpiece whispering encrypted fragments. The units see inbound, searching for the female oxen. They weren't just hunting her now. They were broadcasting it. She pressed her back against the wall, eyes narrowing. Everything had spiraled. She'd been so focused on Dax, on getting him help, that she'd underestimated Seren's reach. The assassination attempt hadn't been personal, it had been calculated. Take out Kale. Destroy her credibility. Leave the Terran arcs and negotiations in ruins. Then start a war. She couldn't let that happen. Not after everything. The rendezvous point was 2 levels up, near the abandoned transit bay. A few loyal agents, the kind who still remembered what Kale had done on Carthias Prime or during the barricade crisis, had agreed to meet her there. With them, she could expose Seren's plot, if she lived long enough to reach them. She moved fast through the lower level, every step deliberate. The shadows were her allies. For years, she trained to kill in places like this. Now, she used every ounce of that skill to survive. 2 guards turned the corner. She didn't hesitate. A Espion, low and hard. Her boot took the first in the throat. The second reached for a calm unit, too late. Her blade whispered out and left him crumpled, silent. She dragged him behind the crates and kept moving. By the time she reached the elevator shaft, it was jammed with debris, sabotaged. Typical. Kale looked up. Then she holstered her rifle and began to climb. Every pull was agony. The shaft was vertical, narrow, and lit only by flickering emergency lights. Her muscles screamed. Her arm burned from the wound she'd been ignoring for days, but she climbed anyway. For Dax, for the fragile trust between 2 species that couldn't afford to collapse. When she reached the upper level, she pried the doors open with her bare hands and rolled out onto the floor. Her chest heaved. Sweat stung her eyes. She was close now. The corridor stretched ahead. And just at the end of it, shadows moved, 3 figures. One tall and unmistakable. Saren. Kale rose slowly, hands up. Not in surrender but in control. You never knew when to stay down. Her voice was calm, precise. Her ceremonial uniform was spotless, a stark contrast to Kale's torn field armor. I'm here to expose you. Saren tilted her head. And you were always a coward. Saren's eyes flicked. A signal. The 2 guards raised their weapons. Kale dropped to the floor as the first shots rang out. Her sidearm barked twice, precision shots, fast and clean. One guard dropped. The other staggered before a knife found his throat. Only Saren remained. They stared at each other, breathing hard. You'll be hunted for this. I already am, Kale said. Oh? Saren lunged. Their blades clashed, metal shrieking in the narrow corridor. Kale ducked, pivoted, felt the edge of Saren's knife graze her ribs. She countered with a knee to the gut, followed by an elbow to the face. Saren stumbled. Kale pressed the advantage. They fought like mirrors, each strike met. Every counter familiar. They had trained together once. Laughed together, but that was before. Kale caught Saren's arm mid-strike, twisted hard, and disarmed her. The blade clattered across the floor. Saren didn't plead. She stood, proud and furious. Kale shook her head. No, you did. She struck once, fast, and Saren collapsed unconscious. Moments later, Kale reached the rendezvous point. Her contacts were already there, 3 agents, cloaked and tense. Status. Target neutralized. I have proof of her involvement in the assassination attempts. Biologs, encrypted comms. Another agent nodded. Good, the council's been on edge. Kale handed over the data chip and slumped against the wall. Her wounds ached. Her body felt like it had been stitched together with thread and pain. But her eyes were clear. Where's Dax? Recovering. The drone worked. A breath escaped her lips, part relief, part something else. Something raw and human. She didn't ask to see him. Not yet, there was more to do. But deep inside, a tether pulled gently, warm and steady. He was alive. She had kept her promise. And when this was over, when the truth was laid bare and the dust settled, she would go to him and tell him everything. The council chamber was cold and sterile, a vast elliptical room framed by towering windows that revealed the fractured skyline of the diplomatic station. Outside, the distant stars blinked indifferent to the storm of politics and betrayal unfolding within. Kale stood at the center, flanked by a handful of trusted allies. The evidence against Saren was undeniable: encrypted transmissions, audio logs, even footage of the failed assassination attempt. The council members listened, their faces hardening with every word. What had begun as whispered rumors now rippled into an undeniable crisis. A ripple of murmurs ran through the chamber as the final recording played, a chilling confession from Saren, cold and unrepentant. When it ended, silence fell like a blade. One elder spoke, voice measured but heavy. Saren's faction has sought to undermine the fragile peace we've fought for. Her actions could have ignited a war. Thanks to you, Kale. Kale's gaze swept the room, settling briefly on the glass behind the council where she could see Dax's medpod glowing softly in the adjacent medbay. He was awake now, stabilized but still weak. She had been allowed only brief moments to see him, and those were the most precious seconds she'd held in months. The chamber's tension lifted slightly as the council deliberated. When the verdict came, it was swift. Saren and her co-conspirators were to be detained and stripped of all political power, pending a full trial. The peace process would continue, but now under intense scrutiny. Kale exhaled, a weight lifting from her shoulders. The reckoning had come, and she had survived it. After the session adjourned, Kale slipped through the corridors toward the medbay. Her heart quickened with every step. The sterile scent of antiseptic mingled with faint hums of healing tech. She pushed open the door. Dax was sitting up, propped against cushions, his dark eyes locked onto her the instant she entered. A faint smile touched his lips, a ghost of the man she had come to trust, to care for. "You kept your word." "I always do," she replied. He winced, wincing again as the pain reminded him of how close he'd come to death. "You risked everything." Cale's eyes shone with a mixture of exhaustion and something fiercer. Hope. "You're more than a mission now, Dax." They shared a silence, heavy with unspoken confessions and fragile truths. For the first time, the armor around them seemed to crack, revealing the human beneath. The medical techs entered then, their presence a reminder of how fragile his condition remained. But as they worked, Cale stayed by his side, fingers brushing his hand in quiet solidarity. Days passed. Slowly, Dax regained strength. The wounds healed, but the bond between them deepened. They trained together in the empty corridors, sharing tactics and stories, laughter mixing with lingering pain. Cale showed him the station's secret passages. He taught her how to trust beyond duty. Yet shadows remained. The political fallout from Saren's coup attempt rippled outward, forcing Cale into a new role, not just as protector, but as a diplomat fighting for peace on fragile terms. One evening, under the soft glow of the station's artificial twilight, Cale and Dax stood on an observation deck overlooking the void. Dax asked, voice low. Cale stared at the stars. "It has to." He reached for her hand, squeezing gently. She smiled, the warmth real and steady. "Then we fight." Far below, the station hummed with quiet life, messengers, guards, diplomats, all moving toward a future still uncertain but no longer hopeless. Cale felt the weight of her past, the scars of betrayal, the cost of survival. But with Dax beside her, bleeding for her cause, breaking every protocol she once held sacred, she found something new, hope born from sacrifice, a fragile alliance that might just change everything. As the distant stars pulsed with ancient light, Cale whispered to the void, "This is only the beginning." And somewhere deep inside, she knew it was true.